And so they gave you a lot of support in that way. But you didn't have any trouble really confronting somebody like Ray Bliss or John Mitchell, in a sense, if you saw they were hostile or uncomfortable with a woman saying the things to them that you just described saying, and getting them to just turn around on a dime, basically, and say, gee, you know, I better just shake off my old biases here. This woman, you know, operates the way, you know.
Well, we had an arm's length. The Nixon White House did not approve of women either. They had very few women working there. Rosemary Wood was Nixon's secretary, but Haldeman and Ehrlichman didn't approve of women either. And I remember once when I wanted to make some recommendations about appointments, and nobody knew anything about appointments, but we had been sort of involved here. So I called up, and one of the men said, well, I wasn't his dish of tea. So I just called back his secretary, and I said, I just like him to know that I don't plan to sleep with him. I just want to give him a couple names of women who would be good appointments. Well, I never did care for that man, and he always was. But they were chauvinists in the White House.
Well, let me ask you. George Romney, of course, as you say, was not, as you describe it, anti-female at all, and yet he made. You know, he used to go around and say this. He used to say, Elly Peterson thinks like a man, looks like a woman, and works like a dog. And of course, he always got big laughs and everything else. I'm just curious.
From everybody but me.
Well, that's what I was wondering. But why you? What did you think?
Well, those things are patronizing, you know. Mm-hmm. And I always said that when he said that, he meant that I think like men think they think. Mm-hmm. And because I found woman after woman throughout this entire nation who were very smart politically. Mm-hmm. They really, Pat Hitt in California, Lorraine Orr in Nebraska, right here in Michigan, Gert Powers and Joyce Braithwaite. And I had about 28 women in my group, and they were wonderful strategists, fundraisers, whatever you gave. But it was just a hard battle.
So you just kind of cringe inwardly when George Romney would say this, not say anything outwardly, but you didn't really, you thought this is Looney Tunes, but this is the kind of stuff a woman has to put up with in public life.
That's right, you just had to put up. And he thought he was complimenting me, you know.
Exactly.
And that, of course, is now Bill McLaughlin would never have any problem with that at all. It didn't bother him that I was state chairman, he was vice chairman. And so some men can take it. I always thought a man had to be awfully sure of themselves, Bill. My husband could stand me being gone and being in the public eye because he was absolutely confident of his own ability.
Right.
But men that aren't confident of their ability are afraid of women.
Makes a big difference. Let me just ask you about a few political personalities that we've touched on so far, some that we haven't, just to get your quick impressions. Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon, to my way of thinking, was the most brilliant politician probably the nation has seen, but he was so insecure. I remember once he and I were flying alone to the Upper Peninsula, and this was before, I guess when I was running for the Senate, and he gave me a lecture on counting votes that I never forgot. He knew all of that. And when I became assistant chairman, he said to me, I told him I was going to have a Jewish women's organization and a black woman and an ethnic group because their culture isn't the same. He thought that was a great idea and called other people. He was very knowledgeable, but it was so difficult to get to see him. When he had told Raj Morton and me when we were elected that we would have access on him, but it was very difficult to see him.
But the Prussian Guard. Haldeman,
the Prussian Guard,
that sort of thing.
Kept you away, but it didn't bother us. We just went ahead on our own. But Nixon, if he just hadn't had that insecure feeling, it was too bad.
What about Bill Milliken?
Oh, Bill Milliken. Everybody loved him, and everybody respected him, and everybody wanted to know him better. And Helen was so naive when she started, but she grasped the essence of the women's movement, you know. And both of them, I think, are just fine examples.
Did Bill Milliken end up being a different kind of governor than you would have thought he would have been back in 1964?
Bill, I wasn't here. I really don't know a great deal about that. That's when I worked in Washington a while and then lived most of the time in Hawaii. So I really can't tell you that. I know that that I never saw anyone who had the following he had.
How about Zoltan Ferenczi?
Oh, I loved him. He was so funny. He always had a funny remark to make. And somebody asked him if he worried about working against a woman, and he said, "Oh, she's an old political war horse with the scars of many battles." And I said, "I hope I give you a few, Zoltan." But I had 2 farewell parties, both times I went to Washington, and he showed up at each one.
I'll be darned. That's something. What about Millie Jeffrey? Did you know her?
Millie, oh yes, she and I knew each other through the Equal Rights Amendment and the women's movement, and I was a great admirer of her. She's a stalwart, and she gave much of her life to promote women and their interests.
What about Lyndon Baines Johnson?
I didn't know him. Now, Lady Bird was wonderful to me. He died before I got to know Lady Bird. But I lived with Liz Carpenter in 1976, and she was the secretary, a press secretary. And through her and going to Texas, I got to know Lady Bird. And she was wonderful to me. I've been entertained in her home many times. And one time she had a party, and she had all the political writers there, Tom Wicker and people like that, you know. And Lady Bird didn't have a party where you just came and sat around and had a drink and an hors d'oeuvre, you know. You had to do something. So she said, "Now I want everybody to tell their most embarrassing moment." So I told them about being in the press studio, much as we are today, with George Romney. And he was tired, and he was in a hurry, and they had to go over it and repeat it. And finally, he said, "This is going to be the last time we're going to do this, and it's going to take," and you knew he meant it. Would you believe a fly hit my face, and it went around my mouth and up over my nose, and I gave every word of my remarks and didn't twitch. Well, he had the grace to laugh, and we all collapsed, and it was very, we thought that was funny. So I told that story, and they couldn't believe George Romney would do that.
How about Barry Goldwater?
I never knew him very well, and didn't really have any reason to, because I went to that convention for Rockefeller, Scranton, or Romney, you know, one of those three, and they made you feel that. And the next morning, when we went into our state chairman's meeting, those of us who had been for them were given the real cold shoulder.
What about Nelson Rockefeller?
Oh, I thought he was so understanding of anything you tried to do. He promoted the volunteer program to the hilt. And the last campaign that he did for Ford, he invited me to go with him, and we flew all around Michigan together. And
this was in 1976, when Ford was president, running for nomination for a full term against Reagan.
And Rockefeller was vice president,
but already wasn't there a commitment that he was not going to be the running mate?
Well, the conservative group didn't tell Ford he couldn't have him.
Right.
So I think that was sort of an upset for Nelson.
Right.
He enjoyed that, and he said, he told me once that he would have gone to work as Jerry Ford's chief of staff if he had been wanted, because he believed so strongly in the fact that the Republicans needed to govern this country.
Right. Well, when you talk about the action program that you had, and Rockefeller's interest in it and Romney's interest in it, is one of the reasons that you were so committed to that because you felt that the Republican Party of the two major parties in particular had to demonstrate that they were a real grassroots, people-oriented party. They had to overcome this stigma that probably still applied to a certain extent since Herbert Hoover in the 1930s, that the party, the Republicans were the fat cats and the country club people who didn't really care about what was going on. And this was a way to really show.
Well, that, and also, if you looked at a community, so many of the leading volunteers were Republicans, and it seemed to me that that could all tie in together, and they could, and it would